Okay, so we will get started. So, welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is Planning for Small Modular Reactors Policy and Practical Solutions for Successful Nuclear Development. I am Millie Beaver, I'm chairing today's discussion, and I am the Head of Public Affairs at the Nuclear Industry Association. I have been at the NIA for 2 years now, and I have a background working in Parliament for various MPs and then in Public Affairs Agency. It's a very important and timely discussion today at what remains an incredibly brilliant time for the industry. We, as many of you I'm sure will know, have Wilva's development of Rolls-Royce SMRs. The Advanced Nuclear Framework has been published by government earlier this year. X-Energy are looking to deploy at Hartlepool. Holtec are looking to deploy with EDF at Cottam. And then obviously on the other side, we have Sizewell C and Hinkley Point C also developing. And they are just a short snippet of things that are looking to develop here in the UK. And I'm sure our speakers may refer to a few other projects that are looking to get started here. Speaking of our speakers, we have three excellent speakers today who I will now turn to each and ask for an overview and their views on how we can deploy SMRs most successfully in the UK. Each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes, and then for the latter half of the session, we will have a Q&A. So there is a button on your screens which says Q&A. It may be under more. Don't use the chat. Put all your questions in through the Q&A button, and we will get through as many as we can. Please put them in as and when, so that we can jump straight to it once our speakers have finished speaking. So first of all, I will hand over to Robert from Last Energy. Robert, take it away.
Thank you, Millie. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Robert Sedgman. I'm the UK Development Director for Last Energy, and we are currently got two publicly announced sites, one at Lenfee in South Wales, just south of Maestag, and the DP World site in Thurrock in Essex. In terms of Lenfee, we are about halfway through the site licensing process with the Office for Nuclear Regulation. We have been in the DNS planning process in Wales, but we've just switched to the ICO process in Wales, and we're looking to put our planning application in later this summer. So we're well ahead, and we have just completed building our first demonstrator reactor for the Department of Energy in the US at the A&M campus at Realis, which is due to go critical very soon, and I'll come back to that later. So from our perspective, the planning reform is only useful if we turn nuclear from a bespoke national project into deployable clean energy infrastructure. And by that I mean, instead of having just concentrating on one site at a time, we concentrate on multiple sites using the same technology and design, which is the very heart of SMR. So rather than doing individual gigascale projects, just have multiple projects under the same regulatory framework. EN7 has broadened the policy case for nuclear and put them into the NSIP framework. And of course, being low carbon, firm baseload power, we present the best case for net zero going forward. The key point is that we should not have a one size fits all gigascale based assumption for planning. I mean, our units are only 20 megawatts electrical compared to the 470 for one unit at Wilfa. So we believe in proportionality, reducing duplication, removing overlaps between planning, environmental permitting and nuclear regulation, and make it predictable and technology neutral. You mentioned the Advanced Nuclear Framework earlier. That is a bit of a retrograde step in our view, because that duplicates a lot of the work the ONR is doing and adds cost and time to deployment. Um, but through the nuclear regulatory review, we have a very strong opportunity now to overcome the difficulties that beset nuclear: risk aversion, process over outcomes, fragmented oversight, disproportionate decisions, government indecision, and weak delivery incentives. Uh, we think that these units, from our size up to the Rolls-Royce scale, are critical national priority projects, and we should have a unified regulation system, with the lead regulator being the ONR, in order to streamline and deliver planning more quickly. We do think that EN7 has been an important shift, but we need to see that being implemented and coming through in actual deployment. We do need a UK broader siting model in order to allow us to make use of sites that are available, and particular, we're working on a number of ex-coal-powered power stations, and we no longer need, because our units are air-cooled, to be set by the coast or some major water intake availability. So we can spread out and site units in more varied locations. In very small locations, our units are a third of the size of the football field. You can probably see the 4 units proposed at Lenfie behind me. So we think planning should allow for this proportionality and move forward. We do think early regulator assessment engagement is essential, and we've been working with the ONR, Natural Resources Wales, PEDU and the Welsh Government, as well as DESNES and Department of Trade, etc., to move these things forward and try and reduce our planning delay risk. In terms of WILFA, I think WILFA is a great project, and it shows the value of strong site identity. It's very politically visible and demonstrates grid scale ambition. But from our perspective, I think the early lesson is that, as I said before, we need to avoid making every nuclear project a WILFA style pathway, in that we need to make a key differential between large nuclear sites and micro reactor sites, which serve different needs and different markets and can be placed safely in different types of locations. And even though WILFA can anchor major nuclear development, the smaller brownfield projects, such as Cottam, ourselves, can deliver distributed power closer to industrial demand, and a successful UK programme needs both. So I'll finish there and hand back to Millie.
Thank you very much, Robert. Very, very interesting way to start our discussion. I will hand over now to Mustafa from TLT. So Mustafa, take it.
Thanks, Millie, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Mustafa Latif Aramesh. I'm a partner at the law firm TLT, but I was also appointed by the Prime Minister to the Nuclear Regulatory Review, which was published in November. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is about the Nuclear Task Force report and what it says and how it can help streamline the delivery of new SMRs. You can't really get to the solutions unless you acknowledge what the problems are, and Robert's done a good job of summarizing some of those. The key thing and the key problem is that we have a very high cost system. There was a report that was published last week by the Centre for British Progress, which found that in the UK we effectively have a premium on the construction of major infrastructure projects. In the nuclear context, that's a 53% premium. In other words, for each unit of infrastructure, we're paying 50% more than comparable countries like France, Canada. We should therefore be quite wary of those who want to maintain the status quo and think that simply returning to the early 2010s is a preferable system for our planning processes and the regulatory framework more broadly. What is driving that cost? In the report, we outlined three fundamental drivers. The first is risk aversion. The second, as Robert has alluded to, are duplicative approvals. And finally, there is both a mindset and an embedded part of our system is putting the process over the outcome. And just to give very concrete examples of each of these causes. So on risk aversion, what you find is that risk aversion is something that affects both developers and regulators and the wider supply chain. So one of the key things in our report is that we never point the finger or say it's just this single party who is responsible. It is a systems problem where risk aversion is almost embedded into every single aspect of decision making. A pretty good example of that kind of risk aversion is I'd encourage you to have a look at the construction compound layout for Sizewell C. What you will immediately see is that it almost looks like a Grim Reaper's scythe. And that is because it has been designed to avoid a triple SI. And as part of those proposals, there's a triple SI bridge. And there are obviously good reasons for seeking to minimize the damage in a triple SI. But on the point about standardization, which Robert has mentioned, effectively trying to copy and paste a reactor design, construction methodology, and then operational matters. When you treat each project as a bespoke activity, it ends up with construction compounds looking quite different. And so that is a good example of where a construction compound layout added quite significant costs on to the entire development program, essentially because they took the path of least resistance. An example of duplicative processes. So again, Sizewell C is a good example where even though they have their development consent order, there are likely to be at least a further 160 approvals required following the grant of that DCO. The other really good example of duplicative processes is regulatory justification. So regulatory justification is the approval that you need for a nuclear project to show that the disbenefits to human health are outweighed by the benefits of the technology coming forward. And that's a slightly bizarre approval that you need because the national policy statements are clear that the government supports the urgent need for new nuclear. And the question, do the benefits outweigh the harms, has at least been answered on the policy level. And then finally, on the third cause, putting process over outcome. What we very clearly identified is that people have become wedded to existing processes rather than thinking about the outcomes that they want to achieve. So in the environmental context, it is less about what is the best thing for the environment, and it is more about following the on a very, very precautionary basis, the strict letter of existing regulations. And a good concrete example of that is the fish protection system at Hinkley. And what you find is we have spent a significant amount of money on a system which protects a fairly small number of protected fish, underlying protected fish, at quite a significant cost. And it would have been better for the environment if alternative processes and funding had been put in place to enable genuinely environmental enhancement. The point to mention, I think, in this context is that again, we've in the report we never say that any single party is responsible. It's not the regulators, it's not the developer, it's not the lawyers and consultants who saw this and didn't raise a red flag. It is embedded in the system that is that all developers had to go through. So those are that's the diagnosis. Those are the causes that we found. Moving on to solutions, which I think is supposed to be the main part of this discussion. Um, so we recommended, and I should say the government approved all but one or two of the recommendations. We recommended embedding proportionality. So the first aspect of that is standardization in national policy statements to enable fleet approaches to the delivery of SMRs. We already have very strong national planning policy support for new nuclear. What this recommendation was about was to give effect to what Robert mentioned of standardization so that you're not reinventing the wheel on a project by project basis. Now, there is a lot that sits behind that recommendation, and there is a lot of thinking that the good people at DESNZ have already done. But that by itself, which is trying to embed standardization so that you're not constantly treating each project on a purely bespoke basis, I think would have stopped some of the examples that I mentioned earlier. The second is something called the semi-urban population density criteria. So this is an aspect of the national policy statement which is aimed at avoiding siting nuclear reactors near major population centres, as the name suggests. The only issue is that the existing methodology that is used to work out what is a suitable distance is, to be frank, bogus. It's based on a paper from the 1960s, which doesn't take into account topography, modern literature on decay rates, and nor does it take into account the relative size. So Robert's 20 megawatt reactor would score exactly the same as a 2.4 dual reactor basis, which, on the face of it does not seem appropriate. What we recommended was for light water reactors, removing that criteria, and for all others, revising the methodology. What the government is taking forward is the revision of the methodology for all reactors, which is very welcome, and they've committed to doing that in the next 12 months. That means a number of existing sites like Heysham, which have the potential to fail that criteria, can come forward, and that's especially useful because they have very welcoming local communities who have a deep heritage of nuclear. In terms of dealing with risk aversion, there are a number of recommendations. I'm not going to summarize all kind of 47 of them, but one of the key ones which was driving the risk aversion in the system that we've seen was the concern about judicial review. We made a number of recommendations on judicial review, which are being taken forward by the government, and that should help reduce the overall risk aversion in the system. Minimizing duplication, so that concept of regulatory justification that I mentioned, the government is taking forward a regulatory justification approval, which is of a general class rather than a technology specific class. And then in terms of ensuring that we're putting outcomes over process, again, there are a number of recommendations, but some of the key ones, a simple measure like cost reporting. The cost of the various examples I mentioned earlier weren't in the public domain. Some of them still aren't in the public domain. And we think being transparent about the cost of some of these measures will help move people in the direction of trying to reduce them, but also just being open about what is, what requirements are being placed on new development. There is also a principle of proportionality, which actually comes from an amendment that was suggested by Lord Banner. That particular recommendation, by itself will not make a difference, but what it does do is start to socialize and introduce the concept of needing to be proportionate. One of the issues that drives a lot of the issues that we've seen is cultural practices, and it's incredibly difficult to change institutional cultures without some kind of lever. And there are a number of other environmental recommendations, but I might leave those for the Q&A and hand back to Millie.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. And then finally, last but not least, we will hand over to Adam at Mace. And please do put your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A box so that we can jump straight into a Q&A afterwards. Adam, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Millie. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending. So yeah, my name's Adam Gardner. I'm a senior manager at Mace, working on nuclear team. So almost a decade in the industry, stemming back to work with SMRs back in 2022. So Mace are very much looking at the delivery of national and international mega projects, including Hinkley and Sizewell, and also moving on to Rolls-Royce SMR up in Wilfer. So yeah, before I go into talking about how planning reform is accelerating SMR deployment, I think it is useful to talk about the context, the optimism in the industry, and why this reform has been important. Because 14 billion invested in Sizewell C, over 2.5 billion in Rolls-Royce up at Wilfer. All the mood, it feels like, in the industry is incredibly optimistic. But we do have one of the most expensive nuclear industries in the world, with that 50% premium on nuclear projects. So yeah, what we're seeing at the moment is a move to make that more efficient and to make sure that we can deliver energy infrastructure projects on time. So we know within Mace that an average program delivery of an energy infrastructure project is over 12 years. And actually, we need to streamline that to make sure that cost comes down and we can deliver on time to increase national confidence. So in terms of planning reform, not going to touch on this too much because Mustafa did a great job, but with the national policy statement, actually having SMRs, explicitly mentioned, really reduces uncertainty for developers in it, and it reduces the amount that you will need to justify. And this policy environment supports this program-based approach to delivering, not just one-off projects, but fleets of reactors. So yeah, increasing this confidence in the industry to deliver reactor on reactor and saving costs each time. So on top of the NPS, obviously with the N7 and the siting of new nuclear, obviously very positive. With sites Hartlepool, Teesside, Cotton, even Pioneer Park up in West Cumbria, we're now starting to see so many more opportunities across the country that we can start to deliver these fleets, which is very, very promising. On top of which, so the advanced nuclear framework that Millie touched on, which has come out recently, looking at getting projects, into a pipeline of delivery up to final investment decisions. So the amount of projects that are coming online, massively increasing and massively positive for the industry. And then finally, just the John Fingleton's review came out at the end of last year, and I believe from the 47 recommendations from that, I believe they all need to be implemented by the end of 2027. So hopefully from this we'll really see streamlined delivery, increased confidence in the industry, and reduction of delivery costs going forward, which will bring down that premium of our nuclear industry, which is very important. So yeah, just moving on to then some of the key barriers being faced by SMR schemes. I think what we're seeing at the moment is about the mobilization of the workforce. Obviously, all of these announcements all over the place saying we're going to deliver all these projects, but currently we don't believe that we have the workforce to deliver it all. So a local scale with Wilfer, how do we mobilize that local workforce? Construction in, the original power station, 1963, generation 1971, shut down in 2015. There's a gap there in the local area to get the people working back in these big mega projects. But even at a national scale, we need to get more people into the industry. We need to work with the schools, local universities. We need to work with colleges to make sure that people do have skills to deliver this whole pipeline across the whole nation. So that's really, I think, one of the big issues we're finding at this early stage of SMR deployment, and is going to be really, really important going forward. So something that we do within Mace is work within local communities and look at that kind of skills gap and look at see how we can support. But then I guess going forwards, obviously with none of these being deployed in the UK, it's hard to say about development issues, but really with that fleet-based approach, what we want to see is just consistency of design. And for a development point of view, you want that increased confidence of delivery. I can't remember the stat, but the increased efficiency from the first reactor at Hinkley C to the second was significant. And then what we're hoping for is Sizewell. And if you level that up to the SMR program, hopefully from reactor to reactor, we'll really see that efficiency and that cost reduction come down. So I'm imagining that's a barrier to be faced in the future. And then probably just finishing up then on some of the early lessons of these of groundbreaking projects. So now with a nuclear site, probably only 20 to 30% is actually the nuclear side. So 70% of which is an energy infrastructure project, and it's something within Mace that we have a lot of experience of, is working on these mega projects. So we produced a report quite recently called Fission Critical, and the issues that we identified in wider mega projects and lessons learned from wider projects is the issues are familiar. So unclear governance, optimistic estimates, poorly defined scope, fragmented execution, misaligned objectives, and lack of clear direction in supply chains. So, if we're kicking off the SMR program up in Wilfer, it's those issues that we need to focus on straight away. Again, going back to the mobilization of the workforce, making sure that we've got these connections set up early to teach people the right skills that they need to not just work on one project, but again, to work on a whole fleet of small modular reactors, which is hopefully going to be developed over, the rest of our lifetime. So, very, very exciting time, but I think we just need to, be very clear on what we need to do now to make sure that these are the success I think that they've been advertised to be. Thanks, Millie.
Thanks very much. Yes, lots of very interesting points raised, and I'm very pleased to say that we actually now have a question come through in the Q&A box. So Gareth is asking, interested to understand what local, in brackets, community, local government opinion was to more recent SMR developments. How much of a boom or barrier is stakeholder feedback to progressing through planning? So I will come to all of you, but just so we can go back to the beginning, Robert, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, thank you, Millie. So we have had last year over 20 public engagement events in Linfee. We've got another set kicking off week commencing the 13th of July. And we've been all over the Bridgend County Borough Council area, which is the planning area that we sit in. And it's been interesting. Generally speaking, it has been a very low turnout to public engagement events. And it's been a mixed bag, generally fairly ambivalent, I've got to say. What we've missed out on is it seems to be of no interest at all to the younger generation. So people under the age of, say, 45, hardly anybody has turned up at any of the meetings, and our sort of polling in the area suggests that it has overwhelming support in that sort of 20 to 34 age group, but they have shown no interest at all in the public engagement. The two largest groups we've had are firstly, English people who have retired to the valleys and kind of expect to see a lot of spring lambs jumping around in fields, whereas South Wales is actually quite heavily industrialised, which we will be helping to support. And secondly, quite a lot of well, a lot of vocal uh, reaction. Very few people from the anti-nuclear lobby who seem to have misunderstood the differentiation between civil nuclear and military nuclear, and are campaigning against us on the basis of no nuclear warheads in South Wales. So, which is clearly not what we're about. So, um, I would say in general, very little anti-feeling, um, and I think particularly because of our scale, 12.5 meter high units. Um, you know, as you can see from the picture behind, all shielded by trees, um, and with a coal site returned to biodiversity. Um, we're fairly environmentally friendly and make hardly any noise. We have very little traffic movements. Um, uh, and of course, the proportionate risk of a 20 megawatt reactor against a gigascale facility is much less. So, generally speaking, it's going pretty well.
Thank you, Robert. Mustafa, do you have anything to add to what Robert has kind of said in terms of sentiment there?
I was only going to make a slightly meta point about consultation. So one of the measures that the government announced last year in the context of nationally significant infrastructure projects was the removal of statutory consultation. And in the report, we made a very specific recommendation that any consultation wasn't something that was formally required or assessed at the point of application submission. That is driven by the fact that I think consultation has become a slight checkbox exercise where people are, producing volumes and volumes and reams of material, which actually doesn't help a local community or anyone else understand what's going on. And so I think there is a very clear need to ensure that if any form of public engagement is undertaken, it's actually based on the parameters of the project, what is being offered to the local community, rather than constantly rerunning consultations with materials that aren't actually that helpful. I think nuclear generally operates on a social license basis, and so you do need um, uh, uh, to ensure you've got essentially a welcoming local community. But the way to achieve that is not through consultation fatigue, and it's not through kind of over egging the pudding on the steps that you take. The only other point I'd make is that we have a large number of communities, given our nuclear heritage, which are very welcoming to nuclear, and so places like Wilver, places like Heysham, they have very welcoming communities. So it's also important not to overstate the level of potential objection.
Absolutely. I think it's also worth stressing that the majority of communities where nuclear either is or has operated in the past, civil nuclear that is, are incredibly supportive. So they see, and that is purely because they see firsthand and they experience firsthand the benefits of having a nuclear station in their local area. And it's actually communities that haven't experienced the positive benefits of nuclear before that have the kind of slight objection or curiosity as to what that would look like. Adam, anything to add to this point?
Not really. I think Robert and Mustafa nailed it. But the only thing I would just say is that you can't underestimate the amount that the nuclear industry has brought to all of these places. So I think Warrington is the fastest growing city in the UK, and that's been driven so heavily by the nuclear industry with Birchwood Park and all of the supporting industry around it. It is fantastic, and the benefits of the industry bringing all of these jobs into a local community, shouldn't be understated, and it should be really advertised, I think, in the consultation process.
Absolutely. Charlotte Nichols MP is a big supporter of Birchwood Park, and she champions it every chance she gets. We have a few more questions that have come in. So Deborah has said, on attendance at consultations, what Robert saw in terms of lack of turnout by under 45s and stronger engagement and vocal opposition in older generations is not unique to nuclear. It's commonly seen in renewable energy and grid infrastructure consultations, but word of warning, lack of turnout at consultation shouldn't be interpreted as there will be a lack of opposition to any planning application. So more of a statement rather than a question, but has anyone got a response to Deborah, or I will move on to the next question. Robert looks like he might unmute. Oh, you are still muted.
So no, completely agree. Lack of turnout doesn't mean lack of opposition, but we have done separate work to understand the community's views. So we think that is certainly under 34-year-olds seem to have a very strong either neutral or positive view of nuclear, very little negative.
Thank you, Robert. So the next question that has come through is from Hattie, and they have asked, in response to the Fingleton review, government has committed to reviewing options to accelerate nuclear consenting through the targeted use of environmental delivery plans, so EDPs, focused on outcome and reducing process burden. Through his involvement, is Mustafa able to comment on progress / whether this remains a viable and beneficial option, please? So over to you, Mustafa.
That's a good question. So environmental delivery plans, one of the features of them is that you have to know about the potential impact that you're seeking to have covered off in the environmental delivery plan. So just as an example, because everyone's familiar with it, the HS2 Bat Tunnel. If you wanted to stop the Bat Tunnel, you would have had to have known about the presence of the Bechstein bats, gone through the process of making an EDP, and then made sure it had effect at the point that any of the permissions and construction was due to take place. So does it remain a viable option? It does, but you need a lot of pre-planning and resourcing to make sure that the plan can be in place prior to the application or the proposal being taken forward. I think there is quite a lot of misinformation about environmental delivery plans, and the key aspect of them is that they are seeking to improve the overall level of environmental protection and enhancement, in some cases off-site, rather than being a kind of license to do whatever you want on a site. So I think they're a good option. It just requires a lot of pre-planning and making sure it's in place before you take it forward. The one criticism you might hear is that if you're a developer, you will almost in tandem produce your own set of mitigation and compensation, because you wouldn't have the certainty that an EDP is going to be in place. And I think on that front, it is worth watching out to see in the defence context how recommendation 12 of our report is taken forward. There were a lot of noises suggesting that a system that we recommended based on contributing to overall environmental enhancements wasn't possible, and it shouldn't be accepted. The government did accept it in the defence context, so that's probably a really good example to watch and compare with the EDP route.
Perfect, thank you, Mustafa. Adam, Robert, anything to add on these points, or happy to? No, we're shaking heads. Perfect. Okay, I actually have a question in terms of everything that we've discussed so far is very much looking at that you all gave excellent answers to what the barriers are. So in terms of the deployment process, so licensing, financing, supply chain, site preparation, construction, everything that was kind of touched upon by you all, which do we actually think is the most likely to determine success of the deployment of the SMRs? Now, I know all of them will be, but if you had to put one as what you think is the top answer for that, what do we think? We will start with Adam, then we will go to Robert, and then we will go to Mustafa.
What a question. So from our point of view, it's confidence in delivery. So I think it's not necessarily about the first of a kind. It's not going to be that first reactor up at Wilfer that's going to determine the success of the SMR program. It's going to be that repeatability of construction. It's got to be that understanding that from development to development, reactor to reactor, there are efficiency gains and there's learning between each. So I guess to answer your question, it's construction. But yeah, tough question, but increasing delivery confidence through the whole fleet.
Okay, one vote for construction. Robert, where would your vote
go? My vote really goes with site licensing and getting through those regulatory issues, simply because they have taken the longest traditionally. Not too concerned about construction, because construction for us is 9 months on site. So, even if we were 25% wrong, it'd be a couple of months. And, I think, has been said, confidence will go with the first deployment. I've got to say, we'll be a little bit ahead of Wilfer in that we'll be commissioning sort of 2029 rather than the 2040. So we'll be a good 10 years or so ahead of Wilfer. And I think X Energy won't be too far behind. I think they've got plans to deploy 74 before 2035. So, I think the fleets of reactors will probably come before Wilfer, because Wilfer is in that very long government process, whereas I think the ones being deployed by private capital will move ahead a lot quicker.
Thank you, Robert. And over to you, Mr.
I think the key aspect is embedding standardization across all planning and regulatory processes. So in the regulatory context, we haven't touched on it, but a large number of reactor designs have been approved by countries that we trust are safe. They are our allies, and whilst kind of unilateral form of recognition of foreign countries' regulatory approvals, what we did say was, when that has happened, we should try to reduce the amount of information that we're asking, so that it is really about site-specific factors. And then in the planning context, we did discuss that earlier, and ensuring that you can have a programmatic approach to delivery, rather than coming up with very, very bespoke construction compounds, very, very bespoke construction methodologies, layouts and designs for projects, because what you will end up doing is killing the supply chain if you have to start and stop whilst you're redesigning a perfectly safe reactor each time you want to deploy it.
Very interesting. Thank you all. And I suppose another question that I have is, we have slightly touched upon, countries that have done it well, and, we literally just reference the fact that why are we having to go through rigorous approvals again if another country has already approved a reactor design? But what would you all say are the best lessons in terms of reactor kind of deployment that we can take forward from other countries? Adam, we will start with you.
Yeah, I think because we are right at the start of the SMR industry, I guess it will just be a lot about learning what the Canadians are doing at the moment with their Darlington plant, obviously in development. And then I think they've announced 50 new reactors in Ottawa. US just announced another 10 you know, SMRs in the US. It's just going to be about learning from doing, learning what these countries are doing, learning what their success is from reactor to reactor. But yeah, I guess it's a bit too hard to say without actually any of these being built yet. But yeah, just learning from when I guess the US or Canada or whoever builds the first one and the second one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Robert?
So, I mean, so I would take our experience recently in building our first reactor in the States, in Texas. So we started the process in November last year. The reactor and the building has just been completed. Nuclear fuels arrived on site, and we're about to crank it up. So that's what, 7 months, and that includes planning, permitting, site licensing, regulatory process, under the executive order uh, for uh, deploying nuclear reactors at speed. So, I mean, I would take the lessons learned that, you know, if they can get things through planning, construction, and regulatory processes in 7 months, why can't we?
Very good question. Mustafa, anything to add there?
I think Robert's examples of a really good one. Just to give two of my own. So uh, one recent kind of reform has been in Canada, where they are deliberately trying to have a one-stop shop for all consents, and the advanced nuclear project in Canada is being taken forward under that regime. So that is worth watching quite closely, and that is intended to be a kind of one and done environmental assessment. You get all of the approvals that you require. There's a kind of single point of decision making rather than fragmented and dispersed processes. The second example is slightly inverting your question, Millie, which is we don't need to look abroad. We were once very, very good, and by good I mean we did it quickly and we did it cheaply, delivering significant new nuclear build from the 60s till the 80s. So we don't necessarily need to look at different countries to get the right approach. We did do it once, we can do it again.
An excellent point. I shouldn't have said internationally because yes, as you said, we did it very well before. We can do it again. We have another question through now from Dan, who says, at what point within the planning process do you consider detailed logistics slash supply chain planning, moving beyond DCOs to equipment handling, coding, storage, etc.? So we will start with Robert on this, then go to Adam, and then Mustafa. So Robert, over to you.
So in terms of supply chain, we've already had supply chain events in Wales. We're looking to build the modular factory in the UK, both to supply the UK units and those for Europe, for our European customers. And in terms of quality systems with supply chain, we have done that within the process we've done for the first reactor in Texas with our supply chain partners in the US, and we will replicate that process in the UK. So we're already doing it. We're already assembling so the first reactor is built. We're now assembling the balance of plant to go along with it, and then moving on to our first data center projects in the US in the next 18 months. So we're already well down that path. So yeah, we're doing it now.
Thank you. Adam, anything to add?
Just to echo Robert there, right at the beginning and concurrently with delivery, we're looking at supply chain already. Again, looking at obviously we're moving on to supporting the Rolls-Royce project and program. So yeah, already looking at things like supply chain. So that starts right at the beginning. Very important process.
Mustafa, more from a kind of analysis perspective, kind of, is there anything that you want to add to that, or what people should be thinking about, or kind of, yeah, how other kind of factors play into that more practical kind of point?
Just 2 points, 2 brief points. The first is that ideally you would have the information early on so that you can ensure the early approvals you're applying for are consistent with the details that will subsequently emerge. The countervailing point, and that it's the second one, is that often the level of design information that you have at the start of a program is fairly limited. And that is because much of the financing security that you will get for a nuclear project emerges after you get your planning consents. And so what you want to avoid is burdening developers and regulators with having to ask for a whole load of front-loaded information, which essentially means the project is no longer capable of being financed because they have to spend a huge amount of development capital at risk. And so there is a balance between ensuring you've got sufficient details so that you're clear about what's being proposed and that you can future-proof against the more detailed aspects that follow any consent, but also not tipping the balance so much that you are burdening the entire system with asking for details that can adequately be secured and dealt with at the back end. The idea, for example, that you need to know exactly how water discharges are going to work rather than a sufficiently uh, 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 appropriate kind of envelope of what you've got planned. I think that's where the spectrum starts to move a little too much into. You're asking people to put even more capital at risk, and we know there are significant issues with or significant kind of hurdles in terms of financing of nuclear projects. So that's the key consideration in my mind.
Thank you all. And I think maybe, I'm conscious that we don't have too long left, but something that, as someone who mainly interacts with politicians as kind of my key role, we often look at what government need to do, and obviously rightly the regulations they have control over, and they needed to do lots to help make this process smoother, and they are trying to remove the red tape, as they like to call it, and the golden age of nuclear and everything like that. But there is also an aspect of, what do industry need to do now to make sure that everything that government is doing or trying to do and trying to put into place, what do industry need to do to ensure that really smooth transition to get us back to, the civil nuclear superpower that we once were? And I think it's always worth kind of doing a bit of an internal reflection as an industry to ensure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for government. So I just wonder kind of your reflections on that. Adam, we will start with you.
Yeah, I think the key word is collaboration. So yeah, UK nuclear sector just embracing collaborative delivery models, alliancing progressive design and build, and we've had success in the past of embedding a kind of delivery partner approach. So working with clients, regulators, contractors, and supply chain to just bring everyone together in the industry and ensure that we can all successfully deliver. Because we do have this incredible legacy in the UK, world leading, but also incredibly expensive nuclear industry, and we've got a great opportunity now to kind of work together and make sure that the SMR program is really successful.
Thank you. Mustafa, anything to add?
I think the key thing is really digesting the steer that the Prime Minister put out at the back end of last year, so that everyone is on the same page about what delivery entails. And the second point just worth making is that following the publication of our report, the Chancellor wrote to all of the industry, all of the regulators, the supply chain, and asked them specifically how they could not just collaborate, as Adam has said, but how they will increase their risk appetite within the law. Because without taking fairly bold decisions as part of a kind of national mission, it's difficult to overcome some of the barriers that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Robert?
No, I'd agree with Mustafa. I mean, I think what we're trying to make clear to government at the moment is that the processes shouldn't be built around sovereign risk, because we're willing to take private capital risk. And I think apart from the regulatory reforms, which are very welcome, I think it's a shift in attitude that we need to keep reminding government of, is that it's not just sovereign risk, but we are taking the majority of the risk in building these plants out. And that should be recognised within the processes. So they shouldn't keep trying to cover perceived risk on behalf of the government, because there is no risk in many cases. You know, I always tend to go back to, I think Ronald Reagan said, the worst sentence in the world is, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." So I think we need to keep government and politicians reminded of what they have promised under the regulatory framework, the reform regulatory framework, deliver that, and understand the risk profile of privately funded plants.
Absolutely. To round up then, we have 3 minutes left, so I will come to each of you in turn for 30 seconds to a minute of kind of your final concluding thoughts for this webinar, about how we can ensure that SMR deployment is a success in the UK. So Mustafa, I'll come to you first.
I think ensuring the SMR delivery program is a success is partially based on everyone being open to challenge. So the risk aversion, the putting process over outcomes, we should all be checking ourselves on making sure that we're not contributing to it, and trying to draw out as much political and policy support for those kinds of challenges, so that we can take more proportionate decisions. And that, when I say decisions, I don't just mean regulators, I mean developers who are designing their construction plans, or putting forward suggestions on appropriate mitigation for species or particular sites. I also think it just requires a very, very concerted effort from the centre of government, which has already happened through the Prime Minister's steer, the Chancellor's acceptance of the report, the Prime Minister's continued support for the implementation of the recommendations, not just in the context of nuclear. So it's a combination of everyone needing to check themselves, and political centralised steers.
Thank you very much. Adam, over to you.
Yeah, very quickly, just to be reminded of the benefits of new nuclear and why we're trying to do it. Increased energy security, zero emissions energy generation, and if we deliver this whole program on time and to budget, cheap electricity to the grid and to offtake. So yeah, reminded of the benefits.
Thank you, Adam. Robert, over to you.
So I think from what Mustafa and Adam have said, it's up to us to keep focused to make sure this works. This really is the opportunity, or the time for opportunity, for nuclear. We need to keep pushing it, everybody together, to make this happen, and to push out, that famous golden era of nuclear, and make it happen. And that needs every one of us in the industry and in government to keep pushing as hard as we can every single day.
Brilliant. And would you look at that for timing? Well, thank you all for coming to today's webinar. Thank you very much to my fantastic speakers. We hope that you have enjoyed today's discussion and that it has been useful. And we look forward to seeing what happens next with SMR deployment in the UK. Thank you very much.